anything we build that in our minds, like, we think about the metaverse, this could be great on all these levels. The nefarious people are looking at how they're going to use it to do the acts that they do. We don't live in that world as normal people. If you're building something before you go to market and you're totally excited, take a step back and think about how could somebody exploit your product potentially that could use it to do harm to others, even though that is way far from your intent.
Taking a minute to be myself, don't need no help. We keep on rising.
All right, everyone. We are here. This is Connie, your host of Unlocking Commerce in Business, back again to have another conversation during the month of April here in season 2. And today's episode is really powerful. I hope it's powerful when it lands with you and your ears. And for everyone that's been listening, the show is building. There's a lot of different and unique audience members out there, and the data is starting to show us that. Really excited about the conversation today, though, because it's a topic that I've been kind of stepping around and talking about. Last week, we talked about the importance of uh, April being Sexual Violence Awareness Month and how self harm and some of those things come from that place of just unmet needs over a period of time. And we're going to talk about risk today. We're going to talk about with my guest, and I'll introduce her in a second, but I want to set the stage for what's really important for today's episode is that we always hear that risk is a number. It's mathematic, it's a credit score, it's a background check, it's a zip code in a risky area, a diagnosis, a record. But what if risk really isn't a number at all? That's what I want us to think about today. What if risk is a story? And what if the people who get to write the story that never really created the or lived in the life of that person or the people that they're actually deeming risky because they actually are measuring communities by a number that they've never actually lived? And so that's kind of the conversation we're going to have today. It's not about a risk assessment. It could be about how are we potentially erasing individuals in the community because our risk tolerances are what they are, or our company's risk tolerances are what they are. So the individual that I want to introduce with us today is Dr. Shelly Wagers. She has had a tremendous background in um, the field of her expertise, and I'll let her speak about her origin story and how she got into the work that she's doing. But I'm just going to leave you with this before we kick off: is that it's really about the how does risk affect the exchange of value? So everything we talk about on the show is about commerce and the exchange of value. And you all know it means the full exchange of human value, the good and the bad, the positive and the negative experiences that all brings us to who we are. And we all are designed, individually. We have individual designs, expertise, and traits of gifts that we use to exchange that value. So my guest today has actually done the same thing herself. She's actually really learned how to exchange her value, what she's passionate about and really great at. And I think, Dr. Wagers, I just want to introduce you. You are an, I have so much respect for the work that you're doing, and I'm a little bit nervous, I'll be honest,
It's
because I'm
okay.
like,
Thank
you
you.
have so much background, and we've been doing so many great conversations over the years. And to kind of contain that in this digital room right now, I'm finding myself really excited to have this conversation so that the audience can understand who you are and the background that you have and the gift that you're bringing to Florida. So, Dr. Shelly Wagers, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And we're working on expanding past Florida too. So,
Yeah, you're doing some really incredible work. And I think that you are actually someone that knows what it means to bet on yourself, your knowledge, your lived experience, when really the system and the odds that you're kind of tackling weren't in your favor and didn't exist, some of the work that you've been doing. And so I want to talk about that, and I'm really glad that you're here. So Can we talk a little bit about your origin story? Like, how did you get into the work that you're doing today? What did you actually want to be when you grew up as a young woman?
So it's kind of funny and interesting because I wanted to do a lot of different things, but I certainly never said I wanted to be a professor, not at least until college. I wanted to be a vet at one point, and then I learned what you had to do, and I'm like, I don't want to be a vet. But if I look across all the things I wanted to be or paths, I think all of it lands in I wanted to be of service in some ways. And I've also always been very creative and innovative, but not in your creative sense. Like I can't draw. I literally can't. I can't hardly even color inside the lines. So I don't mean creative in the fine arts, I guess, that way. But I always told stories and things, and so creative. And I can see connection dots. So I kind of fell into everything I do. On one hand, I'd say I fell into it, but on another hand, I'd say I just was never scared to pivot and trust and put out there what am I supposed to be doing. So I'm a firm believer in we're all here for a reason. We're all supposed to be doing something. Whatever that something is equal in its importance. Some of us might land in positions or times where people see our work and say it's more important, but I don't believe that. I just believe it's more visible and everything is equally important. There's a plan bigger than us. So I think that's how I fell into work, into what I do, because it was always just, how are you going to use me? And then I follow. So I and it is scary at times. And I have changed careers a lot. So I started in public health education because I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And I knew I didn't want to do business because that's what my mom and stepdad had done. And they didn't seem happy. So I didn't really want to do that. My dad was a cop. That's him behind me, actually. And so I was always on the social service, but teaching side of things. So when I picked my major, I actually did it by looking for courses I wanted to take and what I didn't want to take. And that's how I picked it. I didn't know what public health was. I just knew I liked a little bit of science, a little bit of psychology, a little bit of sociology, and that major seemed to put it together. By the time I finished and I got into the day-to-day work of public health, I knew that wasn't what I wanted to do forever. But I always say the best major is the one you're interested in enough to finish the degree to my students. But funny how I became a professor was the day I graduated. This is a funny story, so you appreciate it, Connie. The day I graduated, pomp and circumstance and all the PhD professors walking in and the big garb and everything, I was like, I want one of those. I need to figure out how to get one of those. I want to walk. I want to be the one walking in. I had no clue what it meant. But the irony of it was my mom was watching and said to my stepdad, Shelly's going to want one of those robes. You watch. And we shared that story later. So I went to work first. I felt that's one, I didn't know what I wanted to get those degrees in, but I always knew I wanted to teach and be an academic at that point. And I knew I didn't want to do it in public health. So I went to work first, and I always was fascinated by law enforcement because of my dad. So at first, I took a public health job as an advocate, doing trainings and developing sexual and domestic violence curriculum in the 90s, early 90s, when we were first. We've been recognizing sexual violence for a while, but just starting to recognize domestic violence. And I did that work as an advocate for a while. And then I became a cop, which, kind of didn't go hand in hand. And I did that for several years. But after I lost my father, it wasn't the same. And that's when I decided to go back to graduate school. And I studied domestic violence still. And I just fell into it. I wasn't a victim of domestic violence. I think for me, I get bored very easily, and trying to figure it out and understand it never got boring. It was always challenging. And I think that's what does it for me. And then after graduating and, being faculty member, and I returned back to Florida and I met Dr. Reed and I was working at USF St. Pete. she came to me with, I want to start a trafficking lab. And she knew I did applied research. And there's overlap, in these concepts, but it was more the applied research. She wanted the lab to serve the community and serve the anti trafficking stakeholders. We're both academics who believe our work should be usable in the field and not just sit in journals. Now, you mentioned, Connie, that poses challenges. It does, because that's actually contradictory to the current functions in higher ed of we get our rankings by the more and higher level those journals are that we put our work. And that's the pressure the academic community is under. So always trying to find a balance of translatable to the community, usable, but keeping my day job by meeting that demand is not easy. And so she asked me to talk to all the stakeholders to find out what was needed, the anti-trafficking stakeholders. And that's what I did. But it was interesting because I entered this program at USF called the I-Corp program, which is actually through our entrepreneurial college. It's so very far from criminology, which is my degree, right?
Yeah.
And there's site nodes with the idea of academics, more in business usually, do research and develop products and how you could bring them to market if they're usable products. And from an entrepreneur perspective, how you identify and decide the product you should build from your idea coming from the community you think you want that product to serve or meet. And they have a social justice model. It's Steve Blank's entrepreneurial model that they follow, and they teach you how to do it. That's how I did the needs assessment, was this mesh of that kind of model with social scientific research. So every piece of what we've done in Bright and continue to do follows this participatory action research methodology of involving the very users of what we're doing or the groups we're seeking to serve in the development and design of what we're building. But that's also layered with developing the use of those technologies, helping them in the field, bringing data in that we can use to better learn and understand and ask academic questions of to build our knowledge in the trafficking space. So that's kind of my journey. But every step along the way, I mean, even with Bright, that's the product and program, when it's really challenging or it's like we're not getting that funding and we need this funding and where's my funding going to come from because I got to keep my staff paid, I just like, okay, show me the way, help me, remind me I'm supposed to, you know, if it's right, it's right. Just have the faith and it always comes through. It keeps going. So
Yeah.
that's working.
It's a beautiful story, and it's really one of you kind of revealing all of where your talents and gifts were, and you tapped into the calling, and it was a mission for you. And I love the service element of it because I think that there's so many areas that kind of keep that knowledge self-contained, like you said, or on a shelf. And it's like, how do we really deploy that out into the community? And that becomes that exchange of value that powers up the people that are trying to learn, and not maybe just inside of the university, but beyond that, the walls of the university too, because you're talking about a lot of real world use cases that are meaningful for innovators and entrepreneurs.
And I think I've always been an innovator. When I was doing the education piece back then for sexual violence or rape, we were doing don't walk with your keys in your hands and don't walk, like very target hardening, we call it in law enforcement, as if the victim has a say or control over if someone has decided, right? And there is some you can make your target harden, but mine was more, let's understand and get at the dynamics and how do you recognize if you're falling into an abusive relationship? What's abuse versus unhealthy versus healthy? And that was in, 1994, 1996, 1997. That was extremely innovative at the time to recast how we look at this. And what I'm doing with Bright, like there's no model within academia, or it's like bridging all of those things there. And so I think the biggest challenges when you're naturally innovative are you feel like when you're ahead of the curve, you take a lot of criticism because people don't like change and the systems don't fit what you're doing. And so it's really hard and can be wearing to try to work within those challenges to figure out, I don't want to say manipulate, but how to leverage the current systems in different and positive ways to help assist what you're doing or get the funding or get the support, how you have to craft what you do and still be true to yourself and be true to, the project or whatever you're working on and its purpose. Those are hard. So for me, with Bright, I have an advisory board. And so I'm always going to the advisory board. I don't make all the decisions. And I'm saying, am I staying true on the mission? Because, we can get an idea and go in the wrong way. So those sounding boards I find, and those being people who believe in the mission and are innovative themselves. So their critiques are legitimate of from their knowledge, this could hurt or this could help, or I think you're going the wrong way. They're not from a place of fear of the innovation.
Right.
And I think that's really important to find those right people when you're an entrepreneur doing something innovative.
Absolutely. And I think that you're mentioning this, and I felt it too. It's some of my work over the past 6 years is, when you're challenging kind of the status quo, the autopilot program, and entrepreneurs are the innovators that kind of see something out in the world and go, the market's telling me that there's something that is needing a change, or we need something new, or we need to pivot. And you mentioned some of those things, but you have to believe in a certain element of your own value, Shelley, that helps you stand in that confidence to show up in rooms that most people walk away from. And you've mentioned some terms already with like sexual violence and abuse. And that those are not easy conversations to have. So what is it that you believed about your own value that caused you to stay in those rooms?
So I don't want to make it sound like I don't struggle every day with my own imposter syndrome, right? Because I do, especially as a woman. Some of it for me, I think, is I just had a natural personality to be very tenacious, stubborn, know I'm right. So I think that has served me well to, you know, I don't know if I always believed I had the value as much as I'm just wired a certain way and can't help it, right? But I've had to tame that too, because that can be harmful, right, to what you're trying to do if you don't figure out how to manage that. And actually, the space I struggle the most in is with my academic colleagues.
Mm,
That's where I feel like the most imposter. And I still speak up in department meetings because I can't help it. But it's the place inside where I feel the most out of place, which is interesting because, I work and I'm tenured and I just won a research award, like an outstanding research award. So my work is, I'm being shown that value. Does that make
congratulations.
sense? But internally, because it's so different what I do, and some colleagues will question that as being real research. It really taxes those inner demons anybody has, right? So I think what I try to do to show up in those spaces again is I don't try to surround myself with yes men, but with genuine people who, and I have a spouse too, who are always like, you on your worst day is better than most. Like you know what you're doing. Like even last night, I was invited to be on a panel by Homeland Security investigations in this money laundering area to talk about FIFA Cup and trafficking and banking. Well, Connie, I don't know a lot about banking. You've kind of educated me the terms, the acronyms. So I felt very like, why am I on this I was recommended and they wanted me, but I was like, what am I really offering that this audience? This is an anti-money laundering. I don't do that kind of criminal work in trafficking and criminology. I do more victim centered. And I had to do, for me to show up confident, which is your question last night, I had to do a lot more prep work than if I just showed up like at my last event. Does that make sense? Like
Yes, it does.
reading and going. So all the way in, I had made voice memos of these new terms and I could talk out loud to like prepping, prepping, prepping. So by the time I got there, I was like, okay, I know what I'm doing. And then I still kept my notes with me, which you've seen me present. I don't usually have notes. I never really looked at them, but I had to have them sitting in my lap. That helped me show up and feel confident in what I was talking about.
Yeah, and that's so important because I think even entrepreneurs, they know where their passion is and they know what they want to try to impact, but the road in between is not always paved. It's a wild west sometimes. And on this show, we talk about a lot about how the future of commerce is going to look. And we're exchanging our value right here, just with fields of expertise that individuals come together and say, I care about a thing and I care about changing the outcome of things. And on the show, what we've spent a lot of time talking about is the technology that sometimes gets in the middle of, kind of gauging based on previous versions of awareness or knowledge and expertise. And it kind of gets stuck. And then it handcuffs us as humans because we lean so much on the systems, we forget about our own intrinsic knowledge and of what's right. So I want to kind of pivot us to the real area of topic today is really why and what we just took you through is how you've learned to really look at the big world in your research and your qualitative and quantitative methodologies. And you were the one that inspired in me four words: least vulnerable or least sophisticated, most vulnerable. And I have used those four words, Shelly, in every conversation. And it causes people to take a pause because my argument here is risk is subjective. People are designed differently. They have different emotional wiring systems. And the systems of yesterday that we're trying to lean in and protect our investment into the future may not be what gets us there. And so I want to talk a little bit about, from a research perspective, when you talk about vulnerability to exploitation, which is your big, broad view that you have, and why you are an expert on those panels, by the way, are we really talking about economics? Are we talking about social work? Like, what does that look like to you?
So, another little piece of my background I didn't say before I did all this victim service work, I developed my own theory and I focused on offenders, offending behavior, and domestic violence and their actions. So to me, when I look at those dynamics, coercion, control, grooming, the things that, we see, they target individuals who, for whatever reasons, are vulnerable at a given place, space, and time. So lots of things can make us vulnerable. So we can look at it like a group level. If I am homeless, lower socioeconomic status, so I'm having to function daily. Just, can I eat today? Like, those basic needs are always a stress for survival. That person's very vulnerable because they're in a desperate state. So that's where offenders kind of go to prey, right? And they can come in offering the things that that individual doesn't have. And that's kind of where I think people go, that's obvious vulnerabilities, right? But the other thing I noticed, like especially in studying domestic violence for 20 years, I could also just be going through a really difficult time. I could have been married and recently gotten divorced, and maybe that divorce happened out of the blue and shock, and I'm depressed and lonely again, and they are patient. So whether we're talking DV offenders or trafficking, when we look at vulnerabilities, they're looking for and identifying for that person at that given place and time what things make them the most vulnerable. Where can they prey? So it can take a wide variety. I could be someone who's just really insecure, and or I could be the person growing up, none of the boys, or if I'm a boy, girls, or whatever, were ever the most interested in. And I felt like I didn't fit in high school. And then all of a sudden, someone who I see as being really attractive pays a lot of attention to me. Eh, You know, that need that's not filled inside emotionally is a big vulnerability for most people. And today, are disconnect from each other that technology has brought. It's ironic. So technology like this, if we didn't have it, people couldn't see me halfway across the world, right? To learn. But on the other hand, when we substitute it at times where we could be in a space together, we're becoming more and more disconnected. And that creates vulnerabilities and loneliness. It's like some of the most lonely people are the ones who are constantly on their devices. And they don't recognize that's what it is because they're like, I have all these friends, I'm doing all this, but there's something. So I think in the research over time, what we're starting to see and find now, we have a generation of kids that grew up with the iPhones from like birth, long enough cohorts and research, they're starting to show the real damages that are happening from overuse of technologies and other things. So when I'm online and using a tech in a chat room, it's interesting if someone doesn't see or know me, I might divulge things I wouldn't otherwise. So kids who are lonely doing that in chat rooms, that's where people go to pray. They figure out those vulnerabilities really quickly, right? So I don't know if that answered your question, but it can take on so many. I could be someone that grew up with a really high self-esteem, high self-efficacy, confident, but if my mother or father like this happened to me, my father was killed suddenly. That time in space in my life, I was very vulnerable if someone nefarious had come in because of all the pain from that event,
Right, right. Those
right?
experiences certainly can kind of pause you and, not it takes you out of your strength. And we talk a lot about that in the emotional awareness kind of work that I do, being out exploring the community, talking with entrepreneurs going, I just can't get past, this particular thing, or I'm struggling to do this. And it really comes down to that emotional design. And it's what is your capacity to express? What is it that you need to feel safe? What is risky mean to you? And but yet we live in systems and worlds that kind of assume we're all the same, or
Yeah.
sometimes assume that we're even a piece of technology that doesn't have purpose and doesn't have, there's different principles that are out there about the human decision to buy something, for example, and use money, which is actually an extension of ourselves, because we deem value in the thing that we're giving up capital for to be able to acquire something that's an exchange of capital, right? It's already been created. So we've had those economic conversations on the show. But I do think that you just brought a lens to the vulnerability to exploitation really comes back to an unmet time of need. And that's the work in the emotional awareness with Dr. Worley that I've always, done. And we know him together. So it's a really important piece that I think that the community is lacking when it comes to marketing, financial literacy, and teaching and academics. I mean, it's got universal application, in my opinion, because it shapes our definition of what risk means to us. And
Yeah,
so,
and
anything else to add there?
if you're an entrepreneur too, and you think about like when am I most vulnerable? It's when I was banking on something, especially early startups, and then that something doesn't come through, and then I'm like, "Where's my cash gonna come from?" My and your whole dream's wrapped up in it. And I might not be running a business, but I mean, I've been there with Bright, right? So much of me has become wrapped up in it, and that sense of responsibility to others that are looking at it when I'm struggling to find funding or it's not gonna come in, that's that's sense of a desperate space and trying to step back, but thinking about Dr. Worley's work that I think is really helpful, like you asked, how do I show up to the rooms or where this risk is? I think in knowing those aspects of who we are from his work helps us better assess what things are hardwired in us that could make us stronger and which places make us just naturally more vulnerable, right?
Absolutely.
If I'm more extroverted versus just some of these like pieces help you know, well, this is going to be the place I need to do some work because naturally that could create a vulnerability or a weakness for me in this space I need to go into as an entrepreneur to try to get my funding, right? And so it helps direct where to put my time and energy, where normally we'll put our time and energy in the stuff we feel most comfortable and confident, which
Mhm.
is usually our strengths.
Right.
Versus, or another way I've done what I've done with that is I tested my whole team and learning and understanding my team. And so I could I've gotten very good at recognizing, even without testing, skills, and I build a balanced team. So make sure my project manager and I, our strengths are we're very different on worldly score, but that complements each other. She brings in pieces for me that ground me when my head's trying to go too big, right? And
Right.
then we have the other components of the and so I sought to hire that speaks to their strengths, their desires, and what they want to do. And I have a very happy, overall well-functioning team that gets an amazing amount of work done. And I'm like, "Are y'all got too much? Are you overburdened?" I'm always checking in. They're like, "No, we're good." Or they'll tell me, "Oh, it's piling. We need to slow down." But we get an amazing amount of work done. And I think that's partially why, because we all complement each other and personality and in skills, if that
Yes.
makes sense. So we have
Yep.
a well rounded way. And I think for entrepreneurs, it can be hard when it's your baby. Who do I trust? That's another difficult space. So finding those, and we've had some pain points where we have trusted a couple of the wrong people, but we usually figure it out pretty quick. And those are challenging times, but figuring that out and going, don't do it all alone. Let someone else that really shares your vision come in and be in ownership with you if they have a compliment. Another example I think of that, my uncle is a phenomenal photographer.
Oh,
I
cool.
and I love him, but the man has undiagnosed, I swear to God, ADD, ADHD, and can't manage business. Everybody sees some of his pictures in my house and go crazy. He was a naturalist photographer primarily. And the man can hardly put 2 cents together now that he's retired because he never found that right business partner that could complement how he functioned and let him just do the photography, but really know how to market him and build his business and manage the business.
I see. Yeah. Yeah, I see. What's really interesting is the pieces about that you're pulling out of like the strengths and the balancing and the counterbalancing of your team. I think that there's always an intention to do that as far as, but we use different tools and there's not consistency in those tools out in the community, and then you have different and so we've done a lot of really socialization of Dr. Worley's work to try to find the right fit, and emotional intelligence is something that isn't taught, and the systems are kind of lacking, and now we're all trying to kind of go back and piecemeal that back together. So I think it's a really beautiful testament of how Dr. Rowley's work has found its way inside of the work that you do at USF. And I'm really grateful to have you as, kind of an example of how you've implemented it. 'Cause I think that's really meaningful. Can we talk a little bit about exploitation as an economic crime, though? Because I
Sure.
want to kind of pivot into financial systems, trafficking, and the machinery of harm per se. So this is where we kind of connect into the financial system that you were talking about, Dr. Wagers, um, and really around as you study a systems problem, what does the financial architecture of trafficking look like, really?
You mean from like the business side,
Just from
traffickers'
systemic
business?
side, like when you look at where some of the markers happen for trafficking, where does that really start?
I'm still trying, like, how we might see it play out today, Connie, or like how they recruit.
Um, I want to see like what is it that causes the vulnerability. So like someone, I mean, to really give up their body. So last episode I talked about sexual violence and I talked about some of the coping mechanisms that cause people to fall into some of these environments that exploit their worth from the beginning, what is it that really connects that, and why should we, from the banking industry, be thinking about that from another system? Because I know you've made your rounds in the legal system, the courts, the criminology. So, and that's one of the areas that's kind of still a little bit
Yeah.
untapped.
Well, so a lot of times it starts fight. So traffickers will use coercion and financial abuse and coercion on purpose, very much on purpose, in order to help entrap or keep somebody entrapped, knowing how the markers work when they get out. Like so examples of how they might do that is use, like in sex trafficking, they use them as kind of the mule of moving the money. So and if I do that, so I've opened an account, so I'm receiving the money from the buyer and it flows right out to the trafficker, and I might start to have an account that gets flagged in the banking industry, that a SAR gets put in on, and I misidentify that victim as a trafficker then. And then once I do that, just as like one example, right? I'm just giving one example. Once I do that, that brings criminal charges or other things on them. It also creates that run of events, right, within the banking industry that starts to label them as a risk for future accounts. So, in another way, the trafficker does it is opening up credit lines, credit cards, maxing them out, buying stuff in their names, intentionally destroying their credit, then not paying them. And so they might not even know that's going on until they get out. So then what happens is when I do finally get out and I'm trying to become a, member of what we call society. I mean, I never know the best way to say it. I hate reintegration, get fully restored. Um, but I'm trying to have a life where I'm not being exploited, right?
Yep. I
And
think it's
these,
post-traumatic growth, by the way, because I've been through something and now I'm trying to just become normal, in the community that I'm expected to be part of.
right. So, what oftentimes has happened is the traffickers destroyed their financial identity. So now, and I have no credit, I can't get a bank account. Because I can't get a bank account, I can't get a job because they all do direct deposit into a bank account. If I can't get a job, I can't go get a loan to get the car to get to the job. It just becomes this trap cycle. So, financial indebtedness, financial abuse, taking their credit, all of those are tactics traffickers use that help keep them entrapped, because if I do try to leave and I try to establish, I hit these barriers and quickly those doors close and I kind of go, well, it's easier to go back. Does that make sense? So that's one way. And then we already touched on another way, which is especially when we look at labor trafficking and other things too, people wanting to come to this country, trying to earn a living. That living might seem like more here, send money back home. They become, when they have poverty, lack of opportunities wherever they live, it becomes easy for, whether it's sex or labor, the trafficker to go, I can give you this job.
Yeah.
So like we see that a lot. Like the event I was at last night, one of the HSI officers was describing a ring they broke up down south in Florida, which was brothels being run by a woman from South America somewhere. I forget which country. I don't want to say the wrong one. Um, Recruiting from that home town, that home country, women saying you can come bartend. She owned a bar. But when they got there, really what it was a brothel. And so she held their papers. So we're looking at this in trafficking, but the desperation was about, I can't earn a living or make money and I'm in poverty here.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And
So
so
I
that's
business.
what they fall into, the rouges then, because of that desperation wanting to get out. So, and we'll see that even with, labor trafficking when they bring them over. It doesn't always have to be attached to um, a brothel, but we'll also see it in construction a lot, migrant farm working a lot, mixed into those who are there normal, right? Will be people who are also being trafficked, papers being held, forced to recruit other family members to come. And that would be forms of labor trafficking.
What I keep feeling in the root of what you're describing here is that at an individual level, I'm still trying to exchange my value. I'm still trying to get my needs met. And it goes back to that emotional design and really understanding what is it for me that's going to help me feel safe and secure and belonging and all of the things so that I don't fall subject to some of these exploitations from whether it's a system or a person. And it comes down to agency. And we talk a lot about agency and autonomy and sovereignty in the future of tech, which is going to take us into blockchains and digital assets and being able to exchange our value outside of centralized systems, which is great. I think that that's probably one of the most innovative areas for technology is AI and blockchain for the future. So, but what I want to think about as we understand the listeners listening to this show is they're trying to figure out like this entrepreneurial lens. What does it have to do with all this crime? What does it have to do with, becoming maybe more innovative in ways that we bring business to communities? And if you were to look at your work of, I don't want to use the word dismantle systems, but maybe augmenting them or shifting the perspective enough, Shelley, that we could actually look at it from a policy, a community, an economic redesign. What do you see? What kind of opportunities? What are we leaving on the table?
One thing I see I'm going to put in here of caution for people to think about is, my time, because I have an expertise, might be a commodity, right? But I, what I see in my space that is getting really scary and really dangerous, and it kind of goes to a lot of our culture, at least here, is my body's a commodity. And this sense of let me sell my body in some way as an entrepreneur. So we've seen cases, I've even seen news in the New York Times of different cases where parents are even doing it on social media. Their kids might be pretty, and I want them to model, but very quickly the nefarious individuals out there will start grooming and moving and asking for really more and more explicit, and it's kind of a slow path, so it's like a little step at a time, and one day you went from maybe this was an innocent photo to now I've crossed this line. And there is research that that line's a little different for all of us. But once it's crossed in an act in a particular way, all of us have a point of no return almost where we feel so degraded and shamed. And so I just want to caution there in thinking about let's not go down a path of, um, you know, not to go after the modeling industry, but let's really think about if my time's a commodity, what am I doing with my body and my time that could start down that path if I'm not careful, and I could end up really uncomfortable. I don't want to make my business around something that one day I wake up and what I'm doing is exploiting people or myself, right?
Absolutely.
Because that's going to wear and bring down the self-esteem and the sense of agency, because I've seen that in the sex industry, like at clubs, like, strip clubs. And I had a couple friends. I knew somebody in college that that's how she paid for college. She stripped. And she would tell herself she had the power in the room because the men are giving her the dollars. That was her way of just getting through. She didn't really feel good about what she was doing. But what she found, I caution about that is our only value. So I,
Right.
I really want to tell people that's not your only value. You have way more value than that. You have way more to bring to the table that's coming from here and in your heart that has nothing to do with the package it's being carried in, right? So focus on those areas of what you bring to the table, to your ideas and your innovation and your time and your expertise and your knowledge. Don't fall down that easy prey trap of those other areas. So that was just something that came to my mind when you were talking.
It's very
Um,
important. And I
there's
think that the package is what we take for granted because, I mean, you look at an Amazon, those are objects that are showing up at our door place. And through the work I've been doing with you over the last few years has been really coming to terms with humans are not
We're
objects.
not
Humans are so
objects.
much more than objects. And we aren't cattle and commodities and technology and machines. We are human beings that have passion and purpose. And so I think that that's where the danger, it's a slippery slope sometimes. So
Right.
thank you for
So
raising that.
that's what I would tell people in your business or your ideas. Just take that pause because on the surface, it might seem very minor, but it could be a first step, down. Someone invests in it that's a venture capitalist that wants a bigger return on money and you feel the pressure. So now you take the next step. And the next thing you know, one day you wake up and you're doing something or engaged in something you really don't like. And that will really emotionally destroy you at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so just think in your point about objects, that's the first place people go to be able to actually harm another human being or buy them, right, in these ways where they're not, with labor, it's a little different than sex because if I have a skilled labor, I should, do that labor for exchange for money and earn a living, but I should get paid fairly for the level of skill I'm bringing and expertise is the point there, right? Sex trafficking and stuff and that is a little different, right? Um, but people can't harm people unless they first see them as an object.
That's
If they
right.
connect with them with empathy like a human being, they can't engage in those activities.
And that is why those 4 words really stand out to me, and I challenge, in every conversation, I'm like, "Are we thinking about technology that truly serves the least sophisticated, most vulnerable user?" And it's been very meaningful to have those type of design conversations or even just how are we running our businesses? How are we designing the product that we think that the market needs when the market is so diverse? And to get to that level means now we're thinking about what's in the highest good of all beings, that's in our customer base.
And to that point, Connie, and my partner always gets mad at me for this, but when you work in the spaces I do and you deal with crime and you're a criminologist, I'll use an example like Facebook and Meta or the metaverse, right? With tech built well and right is supposed to help. We build tech and what I do, right? Us facilitate doing our jobs better, right? Or help us, right? What I always tell people though is think about what could be potentially unintended uses, consequences, and harm. Because my head always goes to how's a criminal going to use this? Because anything we build that in our minds, like, we think about the metaverse, this could be great on all these levels. The nefarious people are looking at how they're going to use it to do the acts that they do. We don't live in that world as normal people, so it's not natural for us to sit and even try to think about that. But I always kind of go, if you're building something before you go to market and you're totally excited, take a step back and think about how could somebody exploit your product potentially that could use it to do harm to others, even though that is way far from your intent. And think about in the planning and development phases, are there safeguards or policies or things I could put into place that target harden it from that simply because it's the right thing to do?
Love
Because we're seeing in my spaces way and way more tech facilitated and AI. Oh my gosh. With sextortion, it used to be you had to make somebody send you a picture first, right? And sextortion is basically grooming someone to send you a sexually explicit picture and then threatening them that you're going to put it across their social media or tell their parents or show it unless they pay you. And it's a tactic that we used to see this exchange more for sexual predators, but now we're seeing it with traffickers and others as a way to get money or lure people into trafficking, right? Well, now with AI, they just go look online and see you on Facebook, grab an image, have AI distort it, and now you didn't even have to send them the picture anymore. So it's just I use AI a lot. I use it to, in my work every day, but it's an example of the creators of that and around that technology how and in what way could we in the creation think of someone might misuse it? How do we is there a way we can protect that from that misuse?
Yeah, it's an intention. It comes down to intention first and foremost. And then am I either going to intend to do good or am I intending to do harm? And unintentional harm can be just as powerful with repercussions and, consequences that affect more than just us.
And
And
that's why we always check in, like in the work we do, I recognize I could do unintended harm every day and it could still happen. You can't get rid of it completely. You just try to minimize it as much as you
right,
can. That's why
yeah,
I always go to survivors and go, could this hurt you? Like, I think it's a great idea, but I don't know things you do where you could tell me how it could be used in a way, and maybe I shouldn't add that new capacity.
right,
Because
right.
as great as it seems, it could really be misused too, and I just don't add that capacity then.
Yeah. Well, I want to just personally thank you for the work that you're doing. It's a tremendous service. I know it's come probably with sacrifices as well as growth. Congratulations on your award. I want to ask you one closing question before we kind of, wrap up the show. What would you say to someone? Let's go with especially a woman or some who has really something really important to give back to the world but hasn't really figured out how to make it their livelihood. Like, what would you say to her?
Gosh, that's hard. Um, the first thing I would say is if it's really our passion and what we're meant to do, throw some faith, do some asking, and listen. Because the paths might be there. Sometimes what we think are the paths, it can come in crazy ways. I read Florence a lot. I forget her last name, but it's that manifestation idea, but it's a little different. It's if I'm really listening. So if we're trying to force and go against the grain, it's not going to come. So we have to really listen and go. As crazy as it seems, maybe this is the path. And I also think small a little bit first too, right? Like I think we always want to go so big so fast and dream it has to be huge versus getting little wins and building on them, right? So if I have this passion, maybe first start with, well, what if I just offered someone who needed it if I just did it for them? That's what I did, like what if I offered my time doing this skill for free? Does someone want to, let me do it and let me get the practice so that I can build my confidence that it has a value and then ask them to maybe refer me to somebody else. And if then people start asking, now I start charging, right?
Right? Yeah,
But at
because
some point you gotta charge. You can't just give your time away for free forever, but I think everybody thinks they should make money right away, where you gotta kind of establish yourself in the marketplace. I mean, it's taken us 5 or 6 years with Bright, and still struggle. So, and I think we lose sight of that. If we look at all the big people, Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, right? Go back to their origins. Yeah, a
absolutely,
lot of years they weren't making any money.
absolutely,
And I think we lose sight of that.
we do.
Sometimes just that it's the tortoise, not the hare. Steady pace, moving forward with intention. The other thing is I think the Steve Blank stuff works. Go really look for and find with your passion if and where the demand is for it and what you might have to shift or alter. That program, iCorp was a great program, and the Steve Blank thing was great because it helps you identify that.
Hmm. Yeah, and I see that even in the financial space. I mean, money still moves with intention. So we have to be intentional. We got to know where the signals are. And it's certainly been an honor to have you on the show, Shelly. And thank you for all of the work, all of the research, and the impact that you're having here in Florida. And I know you're getting ready to expand your banks again, which is fantastic to watch the journey that you've been on. So, where
Yes.
can people find your work, follow your research? Or support what you're building.
Um, Bright. So if they just Google University of South Florida USF Bright project with my name, it'll probably pop up. just got a new website. I know I'm crazy, but they can find me on LinkedIn. Bright is on LinkedIn as well, so they can follow me on LinkedIn. Um, they can follow Bright on, I think we're on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook with the Bright Project and the USF Trafficking in Persons Lab. But
Okay.
usually, if you Google all those kind of together, we kind of come right to the top.
Yeah. Well, and for those of you that are listening, I really hope that what you heard today was, risk is subjective, that it's really about what does risk mean to you? And it's not just a concept, it's not a score, it's not a number, and it's not just a policy argument either. And for this show, it's really about we have to remember how we unlock the exchange of value between human beings that are trying to have a conversation, to create something, to collaborate on something. And when the technology starts handicapping you or cuffing you, where you feel like you're not free to bring that sense of agency and individualism to your projects, that's when it's time to challenge the technology. So that's where we hit that ceiling. So we do have worth, and I'm so glad that we explored that, that kind of evaluation of self. Shelly, thank you for helping walk us through that today, because I know that that's where you study these systems, you bring forth the research, you have those conversations on a qualitative basis, one conversation at a time, so that we can courageously show up for one another, especially as we lean into the future of technology. So I'm going to leave the audience today with, remember that true commerce, is that we have to be able to bring our full value to the table in order to exchange our value in the community. And so let this episode be that disruption to the silence that comes in with that imposter syndrome that even individuals like Dr. Wagers has.
Mhm.
We all have that, but we have to stand in our sovereignty and our sense of self. So I hope that today's conversation moved you. I hope you took away a few nuggets. I hope you learned some things about a really difficult area of work that individuals like Shelly are doing with people that really want to drive change for humanity, and tag someone that wants to hear that. And then go and join us and subscribe to the show, share the show, reach out to Dr. Wagers for her work. And again, thank you, Shelly, for bringing all of that here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Connie. It's been a
Awesome.
pleasure.
Well, we'll see you again soon. I hope so. Thank you for listening to Unlocking Commerce and Business. If this conversation resonated, here's what you can do. Subscribe for weekly conversations with survivors, innovators, and changemakers, building regenerative alternatives to extractive commerce. Share this episode with collaborators, partners, funders, and changemakers in your network. The people ready for restorative commerce need to hear these voices. Drop a comment below. Tell us what patterns you're recognizing or what solutions you're building. We read every one. Commerce is everywhere, and healing extraction patterns inside our communities creates regenerative commerce outside. Like a lighthouse, we're here, exploring and cutting through fog, pointing toward what works. Welcome to the era of restorative commerce. Until next time, explore courageously, build sovereignly. You are the source and store of value. This is Connie Davis signing off. Thank you for being here.